James Morrison had been sitting at the outdoor cafe for nearly an hour, nursing a glass of wine he barely touched. At 52, he'd achieved everything the world said mattered. CEO of Morrison Financial Group, penthouse apartment, more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. But tonight, on what would have been his 25th wedding anniversary, all of it felt hollow. His wife, Catherine, had died 18 months ago. Cancer. Swift and merciless. Their children were grown, scattered across the country with families of their own, and James sat alone at a table set for one, watching the city move around him like he was trapped behind glass. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of autumn and the distant sound of traffic. James barely noticed the plate of food in front of him, some expensive dish he'd ordered without appetite. He'd taken perhaps 3 bites. That's when he heard the soft voice. "Excuse me, sir?" James looked up. A young woman stood a few feet away, hesitant, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She couldn't have been more than 25, with blonde, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing layers of mismatched clothes that had clearly seen better days. But what caught James's attention was the baby cradled against her chest, wrapped in what looked like every spare piece of fabric the young woman owned. The woman's eyes, pale blue and exhausted, met his with a mixture of desperation and dignity. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I noticed you weren't eating much. Would you? Would it be possible?" She swallowed hard. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" Time seemed to stop. James stared at her, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted inside him. He saw not just her worn clothes or the baby she held so protectively, but the courage it took to ask. The love that would make a person set aside pride for the sake of a child. "Please," James said, standing so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "Please, sit down." The young woman looked startled, almost frightened. "Oh, no, sir. I didn't mean, I just thought, if you were finished—" "I insist." James pulled out the other chair at his small table. "Please, when's the last time you sat down properly?" She hesitated, looking at the restaurant's warm interior, then at her baby, then back at James. Something in his face. Perhaps the genuine concern, perhaps the loneliness that mirrored her own, made her decide to trust him. "Thank you," she whispered, sinking into the chair with the careful movements of someone whose body ached with exhaustion. James signaled the waiter. "Bring a fresh menu, please, and some warm milk for the baby, if you would." "Sir, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," James said gently. "But it would be my honor. Please, order anything you'd like." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. I haven't had a real meal in 3 days." James felt something crack in his chest. "What's your name?" Lily Harper." She looked down at the baby, her voice softening. "And this is Emma. She's 4 months old." Emma was tiny, her little face peaceful in sleep despite the cold and uncertainty surrounding her. James felt transported back decades to when his own children had been that small, that vulnerable, that dependent on him for everything. "I'm James," he said, "and I'm very glad to meet you both." Over the next hour, as Lily ate her first proper meal in days, choosing modestly from the menu despite James's encouragement to order more, her story emerged in quiet fragments. She'd been a nursing student, working her way through school when she'd gotten pregnant. The father had disappeared the moment he'd found out. Her family, deeply religious and unforgiving, had turned her out. She'd tried to keep going, working, studying, preparing for Emma's arrival, but complications during pregnancy had forced her to stop working. She'd lost her apartment, lost everything. "I'm not asking for pity," Lily said, her chin lifting with quiet pride even as tears tracked down her face. "I love my daughter. I'd make the same choice again. But Her voice broke. I'm so tired. And I'm so scared I'm failing her. James listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't listened to anyone in months. Since Catherine died, he'd thrown himself into work, into busyness, into anything that kept him from feeling the enormous emptiness of his life. But sitting across from this young woman and her baby, he felt something he'd thought had died with his wife. Purpose. You're not failing her, James said firmly. Look at her, Lily. She's clean, she's calm, she feels safe in your arms. That's not failure. That's love. Lily sobbed then, the kind of crying that comes from someone who's been holding themselves together by sheer willpower for too long. Other diners glanced over, but James didn't care. He sat there, this powerful CEO in his expensive suit, and simply let this young mother cry. When she'd composed herself, James made a decision. It wasn't calculated or strategic. It came from some deeper place he'd almost forgotten existed. Lily, I own a building not far from here. There's a small apartment, 1 bedroom, that's been vacant. I'd like you and Emma to stay there. No rent. Lily's head snapped up. What? No, I couldn't possibly. Please let me finish. James leaned forward. You said you were studying nursing? She nodded, wiping her eyes. My company has a foundation. We provide scholarships. I'd like to arrange for you to finish your degree. We can also help with childcare for Emma. He paused, his voice growing rougher. My wife. Before she passed, she volunteered with new mothers. She believed every child deserved a fair start, and every mother deserved support. Let me do this. Not as charity, but as something she would have wanted. Lily stared at him, her mouth opening and closing. Why? She finally whispered. You don't even know me? James looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully, trusting completely in her mother's arms. He thought of Catherine, of the life they'd built together, of the values she'd tried to keep alive in him, even as her own life slipped away. A very wise woman once told me that we're not put on this earth to accumulate wealth, he said softly. We're here to be of use, to see each other, to help when we can. He met Lily's eyes. You walked up to me tonight, and you asked for help. That took more courage than most people show in a lifetime. The least I can do is answer that courage with kindness. 3 years passed. James stood in the back of the auditorium, watching as Lily walked across the stage to receive her nursing degree. Emma, now 3.5, sat in the front row with James's daughter, who'd flown in for the occasion. The little girl was clapping enthusiastically, her blonde pigtails bouncing. After the ceremony, Lily found James in the crowd. She was crying again, but these were different tears, tears of joy, of accomplishment, of gratitude. I don't have words, she said, hugging him tightly. You don't need them. James hugged her back, this young woman who'd become like a daughter to him over the past few years. I'm so proud of you. You saved our lives, Lily whispered. No, James said, pulling back to look at her. You saved mine. And it was true. In the months after that evening at the cafe, James had rediscovered something he'd lost in his grief. Helping Lily hadn't just given her a second chance, it had given him purpose again. He'd started visiting the foundation. His wife had worked with, had begun to see his wealth not as a scoreboard, but as a tool for good. He'd met Emma regularly, watching her grow from a tiny infant into a bright, curious toddler. He'd advised Lily through her studies, celebrated her successes, encouraged her through doubts. His own children, seeing their father come alive again, had grown closer to him. His grandchildren now played with Emma when they visited. That single moment of connection, a desperate young mother asking for help, a lonely man choosing to see her, had rippled outward, touching dozens of lives. Lily had graduated at the top of her nursing class. She'd accepted a position at a children's hospital, working in the neonatal unit. "I want to help other mothers," she'd told James. "Mothers who are scared and alone. I want them to know it gets better." At the graduation party James hosted at his home, he watched Lily laugh with his family, watched Emma play with his grandchildren, and felt Catherine's presence so strongly it took his breath away. This, he thought, was what she'd been trying to teach him all along. That love multiplies when you give it away, that helping others heals your own wounds. Late in the evening, after most guests had left, Lily found James on the terrace, looking out at the city lights. "Thank you," she said simply, standing beside him, "for seeing me that night, for treating me like I mattered." James smiled, his eyes damp. "You did matter, Lily. You always mattered. I just needed someone to remind me that we all do, that every person we pass has a story, has dignity, has worth." He paused. "You asked me for leftovers. Instead, you gave me back my life." They stood together in comfortable silence, this unlikely family that had formed from a moment of vulnerability and compassion. Sometimes, James reflected, the greatest miracles don't look like miracles at all. They look like ordinary moments, a question asked, a hand extended, a choice to see another person's humanity instead of looking away. That evening at the cafe, he could have said no. He could have turned away, uncomfortable with the intrusion on.